Chapter 10 Viking Station, 6552. Viking hung in view, a gleam in the light of an angry star. Mining, industry regarding metals and minerals. That was its support. Segust Erez watched, from the vantage of the freighter's bridge, the image on the screens. And something was wrong. The bridge whispered with alarm passed from station to station, frowns on faces and troubled looks. Erez glanced at his three companions. They had caught it too, stood uneasily, all of them trying to keep out of the way of procedures that had officers darting from this station to that to supervise. Another ship was coming in with them. Erez knew enough to interpret that. It moved up until it was visual on the screens, and the ship was not supposed to ride that close. It moved up until it was visual on the screens, and ships were not supposed to ride that close. Not at this distance from station. It was big, many-vaned.
"It's in our lane,"
Delegate Marsh said. The ship moved closer still to them, and the merchanter captain rose from his place, walked across to them. "We have trouble," he said. "We're being escorted in. I don't recognize the ship that's riding us. It's military. Frankly, I don't think we're in company space anymore." "Are you going to break and run?" Erez asked. "No. You may order it, but we're not about to do it. You don't understand the way of things. It's wide space. Sometimes ships get surprises. Something's happened here. We've wandered into it. I'm sending a steady no fire. We'll go in peaceably, and if we're lucky, they'll let us go again." "You think Union is here?" "There's only them and us, sir." "And our situation?" "Very uncomfortable, sir. But those are the chances you took. I won't give odds you people won't be detained. No, sir. Sorry." Marsh started to protest. Erez put out a hand. "No. I'd suggest we go have a drink in the main room and simply wait it out. We'll talk about it." Guns made Erez nervous. Marched by rifle-carrying juveniles across a dock much the same as Pell's, crowded into a lift with them, these two same young revolutionaries. He felt a certain shortness of breath and worried for his companions who were still under guard near the ship's berth. All the soldiers he had seen in crossing the Viking dock were of the same stamp, green coveralls for a uniform, a sea of green on that dock side, overwhelming the few civilians visible. Guns everywhere. And emptiness, along the upward curve of the docks beyond, deserted distances. There were not enough people, far from the number of residents who had been at Pell, in spite of the fact that there were freighters docked all about Viking Station. Trapped, he surmised. Merchanters, perhaps, dealt with courteously enough. The soldiers who had boarded their own ship had been coldly courteous, but it was not a good bet that ship was going to be leaving. Not the ship that had brought them in, not any of the others out there. The lift stopped on some upper level.
"Out,"
the young captain said, and ordered him left down the hall with a wave of the rifle barrel. The officer was no more than 18 at most. Crop-headed, male and female, they all looked the same age. They spilled out before and after him, more guards than a man of his age and physical condition warranted. The corridor leading to windowed offices ahead of them was lined with more such, rifles all fixed at a precise attitude, all 18 or thereabouts, all with close-clipped hair, all attractive. That was what urged at his attention. There was an uncommon, fresh-faced pleasantness about them, as if beauty were dead, as if there were no more distinction of the plain and the lovely. In that company, a scar, a disfigurement of any kind would have stood out as bizarre. There was no place for the ordinary among them. Male and female, the proportions were all within a certain tolerance, all similar, though they varied in color and features, like mannequins. He remembered Norway's scarred troops and Norway's gray-haired captain, the disrepute of their equipment, the manner of them who seemed to know no discipline. Dirt, scars, age. There was no such taint on these, no such imprecision. He shuddered inwardly, felt cold gathered at his belly as he walked in among the mannequins, into offices, and further, into another chamber, and before a table where sat older men and women. He was relieved to see gray hair and blemishes and overweight. Deliriously relieved.
Mr. Cherryh,
A mannequin announced him, rifle in hand.
company delegate.
The mannequin advanced to lay his confiscated credentials on the desk in front of the central figure, a heavy-bodied woman, gray-haired. She leafed through them, lifted her head with a slight frown.
Mr. Cherryh, Ines Andelin,
She said.
A sorry surprise for you, isn't it? But such things happen. You'll now give us a company reprimand for seizing your ship? Feel free to do so.
No, Citizen Andelin. It was, in fact, a surprise, but hardly devastating. I came to see what I might see, and I have seen plenty.
And what have you seen, Citizen Cherryh?
Citizen Andelin. He walked forward a few paces, as far as the anxious faces and sudden movement of rifles would allow. I'm second secretary of the Security Council on Earth. My companions are of the Earth Company's highest levels. Our inspection of the situation has shown us disorder and a militarism in the company fleet which has passed all limit of company responsibility. We are dismayed at what we find. We disown Mazian. We do not wish to hold any territories in which the citizens have determined they wish to be otherwise governed. We are anxious to be quit of a burdensome conflict and an unprofitable venture. You know well enough that you possess this territory. The line is stretched too thin. We can't possibly enforce what residents of the Beyond don't want. And in fact, why should we be interested to do so? We don't regard this meeting at this station as a disaster. We were, in fact, looking for you. There was a settling in the council, a perplexity on their faces. We are prepared, Cherryh said in a loud voice, to cede formally all the disputed territories. We frankly have no further interest beyond present limits. The star-faring arm of the company is dissolved by vote of the company's directorates. The sole interest we have now is to see our orderly disengagement, our withdrawal, and the establishment of a firm border which will give us both reasonable latitude. Heads bent. The council murmured together, one way and the other. Even the mannequins about the edges of the chamber seemed disturbed.
We are a local authority,
said Andelin at last.
You'll have opportunity to carry your offers higher. Can you leash the Maziani and guarantee our security?
Cherryh drew in his breath. Mazian's fleet? No, if his captains are an example.
You're in from Pell?
Yes.
And claim experience with Mazian's captains, do you?
He blinked for the instant, was not accustomed to such slips. Neither was he accustomed to distances over which such comings and goings would be news. But the merchanters, he reasoned at once, would know and tell as much as he could. Withholding information was more than pointless. It was dangerous. I met, he confessed, with Norway's captain, one Mallory. Andelin's head inclined solemnly.
Signy Mallory. A unique privilege.
None to me. The company refuses responsibility for Norway.
Disorder, mismanagement, denial of responsibility. And yet Pell is well reputed for order. I am amazed at your report. What happened there?
I do not serve as your intelligence.
You do, however, disown Mazian and the fleet. This is a radical step.
I don't disown the safety of Pell. That's our territory.
Then you are not prepared to cede all the disputed territories.
By disputed territories, of course, we mean those starting with Fargon.
Ah. And what is your price, Citizen Ares?
An orderly transition of power. Certain agreements assuring the safeguarding of our interests. Andelin's face relaxed in laughter.
You seek a treaty with us. You throw aside your own forces and seek a treaty with us.
A reasonable solution to a mutual difficulty. 10 years since the last reliable report out of the Beyond. Many more years than that with a fleet out of our control, refusing our direction, in a war which consumes what could be a mutually profitable trade. That is what brings us here. There was a deathly silence in the room. At last, Andelin nodded, her chins doubling.
Mr. Ares, we shall wrap you in cotton wool and hand you on most gently, most gently, to Cytine, with great hope that at last someone on Earth has come to his senses. A last question rephrased. Was Mallory alone at Pell?
I can't answer.
You have not yet disowned the fleet, then.
I retain that option in negotiations. Andelin pursed her lips.
You need not worry about giving us critical information. The merchanters will deny us nothing. Were it possible for you to restrain the Maziani from their immediate maneuvers, I would suggest you try. I'd suggest that you demonstrate the seriousness of your proposal. You at least make a token gesture toward that restraint during negotiations.
We cannot control Mazian.
You know that you will lose, said Andelin. In fact, that you have already lost, and you're attempting to hand us what we have already won, and get concessions for it.
There's little interest for us in pursuing hostilities, win or lose. It seems to us that our original object was to make sure the stars were a viable commercial venture, and you, patently, are viable. You have an economy worth trading with, in a different kind of economic relationship from what we had before, saving us the entanglements with the Beyond we don't want. We can agree on a route, a meeting point where your ships and ours can come and go as a matter of common right. What you do on your side doesn't interest us. Direct the development of the Beyond as you like. Likewise, we will be withdrawing some jump freighters home for the commencement of that trade. If we can possibly secure some restraint on Conrad Mazian, we'll recall those ships as well. I'm being very blunt with you. The interests we pursue are so far from each other, there's no sane reason to continue hostilities. You're being recognized in all points as the legitimate government of the outer colonies. I am the negotiator and the interim ambassador if the negotiations are successful. We don't consider it defeat if the will of the majority of the colonies has supported you. The fact that you are the government in these regions is persuasive of that fact. We extend you formal recognition from the new administration which has taken charge in our own affairs, a situation I will explain further to your central authorities, and we are prepared to open trade negotiations at the same time. All military operations within our power to control will be stopped. Unfortunately, it isn't within our power to stop them, only to withdraw support and approval.
I am a regional administrator, a step removed from our central directorate, but I don't think, Ambassador Ares, that the directorate will have any hesitancy in opening discussions on these matters. At least, as a regional administrator sees things, this is the case. I extend you a cordial welcome.
Haste will save lives.
Haste indeed. These troops will conduct you to a safe lodging. Your companions will join you.
Arrest?
Absolutely the contrary. The station is newly taken and insecure as yet. We want to be sure no hazard confronts you. Cotton wool, Mr. Ambassador. Walk where you will, but with a security escort at all times. And by my earnest advice, rest. You'll be shipping out as soon as a vessel can be cleared. It's even uncertain whether you'll have a night's sleep before that departure. You agree, sir?
Agreed, he said, and Andolin called the young officer over and spoke to him. The officer gestured with his hand this time. He took his leave with nods of courtesy from all the table, walked out with a cold feeling at his back. Practicalities, he reckoned. He did not like the look of what he saw, the two alike guards, the coldness everywhere. Security Council on Earth had not seen such things when it gave its orders and laid its plans. The lack of intermediate Earthward stations, since the dismantling of the Hinder Star bases, made the spread of the war logistically unlikely. But Mazian had failed to prevent it from spreading all across the Beyond, had aggravated the situation, escalated hostilities to dangerous levels. The sudden prospect of having Mazian's forces reactivate those Hinder Star stations in a retrenching action behind Pell turned him sick with the mere contemplation of the possibilities. The isolationists had had their way too long. Now there were bitter decisions to be taken. Rapprochement to this thing called Union. Agreements, borders, barriers, containment. If the line were not held, disaster loomed. The possibility of having Union itself activating those abandoned Earthward stations, convenient bases. There was a fleet building at Sol Station. It had to have time. Mazian was fodder for Union guns until then. Sol itself had to be in command of the next resistance. Sol, and not the headless thing the company fleet had become, refusing company orders, doing as they would. Most of all, they had to keep Pell. Had to keep that one base. Erez walked where he was led, settled into the apartment they gave him several levels down, which was excellent in comforts, and the comfort reassured him. He forced himself to sit and appear relaxed to await his companions, that they assured him would come. And they did come finally, in a group, and unnerved by their situation. Erez thrust their escort out, closed the door, made a shifting of his eyes toward the peripheries of the compartment, silent warnings against free speech. The others, Ted Marsh, Carl Bella, Ramona Diaz, understood, and said nothing, as he hoped they had not spoken their minds elsewhere. Someone on Viking Station, a freighter crew, was in great difficulty, he had no doubt. Supposedly, merchanters were able to pass the battle lines with no worse than occasional shepherding to different ports than they had planned. Or sometimes, if it was one of Mazian's ships that stopped them, confiscation of part of the cargo, or a man or woman of the crew. The merchanters lived with it, and the merchanters who had brought them to Viking would survive detention until what they had seen at Pell and here ceased to be of military value. He hoped for their sakes that this was the case. He could do nothing for them. He did not sleep well that night, and before morning of Main Day, as Andolin had warned him, they were roused out of bed to take ship further into Union territory. They were promised their destination was Cytine, the center of the rebel command. It was begun. There was no retreat.